At Thanksgiving dinner at my mother-in-law's estate, she pointed her manicured finger at me and declared, "Look at our little charity case completely broke." The entire table erupted in laughter. I simply smiled, because on my phone at that very moment, the confirmation for freezing their $31 million family account had just been approved by the bank. In exactly 12 minutes, her credit card would be declined right here in her own dining room. My name is Ava Sinclair, and until 6 months ago, I was the senior legal counsel for product compliance at Northbridge Pay, a fintech startup that promised to revolutionize digital banking. When the company collapsed after a failed merger, everyone assumed I'd walked away with nothing. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly building something far more valuable than a Silicon Valley exit package. The Hale family mansion in Mariners Point, Rhode Island, stood like a monument to old money and new arrogance. My husband Daniel's family had owned this waterfront estate for 3 generations, each one adding another wing, another yacht slip, another layer of suffocating tradition. Tonight, 23 members of the Hale dynasty had gathered for their annual Thanksgiving feast, and I was, as always, the outsider who'd married above her station. Eleanor Hale, my mother-in-law, presided over the table like a queen surveying her subjects. At 62, she maintained the kind of severe beauty that came from expensive treatments and an even more expensive attitude. Her steel-gray hair was pulled into a flawless chignon. Her Cartier diamonds caught the light from the chandelier, and her voice carried the kind of authority that made grown executives cower in boardrooms. "Ava, darling," she began, her tone dripping with false sweetness as she clinked her crystal glass for attention. "I was just telling Cousin Margaret about your situation. How brave of you to show up in last year's dress. We all understand that unemployment can be so challenging." The table fell silent. 22 pairs of eyes turned to me, some gleaming with schadenfreude, others with pity. Daniel, seated beside me, suddenly found his butternut squash soup fascinating. "Especially," Eleanor continued, savoring each word, "when one comes from such modest beginnings, it must be particularly difficult to maintain appearances when you're completely broke." My sister-in-law, Patricia, giggled behind her napkin. Uncle Richard, the family's self-appointed financial advisor, shook his head with theatrical sympathy. "You know, Ava," he interjected, "I could probably find you something entry-level at one of our subsidiaries. Filing work, perhaps data entry." I set down my wine glass carefully, memorizing every smirk, every snicker, every averted gaze. Daniel's hand briefly touched mine under the table, not in comfort, but in warning. "Don't make a scene." His touch said, "Just take it." That's very generous, Richard," I replied, my voice steady as granite. "But I'm quite content with my current position." Eleanor's laugh was sharp as winter wind. "Position. Oh, my dear, standing in the unemployment line isn't a position. It's a predicament." She turned to address the table at large. "This is why I've always insisted on prenuptials. When people marry for money, well," she let the implication hang in the air like smoke from the candles. What none of them knew, what I'd kept hidden behind careful smiles and calculated silence, was that I held something far more powerful than a prenuptial agreement. I held the keys to their kingdom, wrapped in legal documents they'd never bothered to read, hidden in financial structures they'd never bothered to understand. The Hale family holdings operated through Seabright Private Bank, managing assets worth hundreds of millions. Their operational account alone held $31 million in liquid assets, funding everything from Eleanor's art acquisitions to the family's various business ventures. And buried deep in the corporate bond structure they'd issued during the COVID crisis was a covenant that gave certain bondholders extraordinary powers under specific circumstances. Circumstances that I was about to trigger. I smiled at Eleanor, the kind of smile that would haunt her later. "You're absolutely right. Eleanor, I should know my place." I paused, letting her savor what she thought was victory. "And very soon, everyone at this table will know theirs." The conversation moved on to safer topics: Patricia's latest charity gala, Cousin William's new yacht, the family's planned expansion into commercial real estate. They dismissed me as thoroughly as they'd dismiss a servant who'd cleared the wrong plate. But beneath the table, my phone buzzed with a message from Monica Reyes. My attorney, TRO, filed. Bank notified. Countdown starts now. 12 minutes. In 12 minutes. Eleanor Hale would learn what it truly meant to be broke. The seeds of my power had been planted 2 years ago, when my grandfather passed away. While the rest of my family fought over his vintage car collection and beach house, I inherited something everyone else overlooked: a minority stake in Garnet Ridge Holdings, LLC, a family investment fund he'd quietly built during his 40 years as a corporate bankruptcy attorney. Grandfather had always been the black sheep of our modest family, the one who understood that real power didn't come from flashy displays of wealth, but from understanding the fine print that wealthy people never read. Ava, he'd told me during our last conversation, the rich make 2 mistakes: they assume their lawyers work only for them, and they never read the documents they sign. Remember that. Garnet Ridge Holdings had seemed insignificant at first, just another small fund holding various corporate bonds and securities. But buried in its portfolio was something extraordinary during the COVID crisis. When the Hales needed liquidity to maintain their empire, they'd issued corporate bonds with specific covenants attached. Garnet Ridge had purchased $30 million worth of these bonds, making it one of the largest holders. The covenants were standard boilerplate to most eyes, but to someone with my training, they were a loaded weapon. Section 47B specifically stated that if the bond trustee detected evidence of self-dealing, commingling of funds, or breach of fiduciary duty, they could demand an immediate freeze on all operational accounts pending a mandatory third-party audit. The beauty was in the details. The trustee didn't need proof, just reasonable suspicion. And as the designated representative of Garnet Ridge Holdings, I had recently acquired that trustee power through a quiet assignment letter that no one at Seabright Private Bank had questioned. 3 months ago, I'd started documenting everything. Every time Eleanor used the Hale Family Foundation's credit cards for personal shopping sprees, every transfer between the charity and their personal accounts that mysteriously coincided with her European vacations, every invoice from their private jet company that was billed to the foundation for charitable transportation while flying to resort destinations. The pattern was clear. Eleanor had been treating the family's various legal entities as her personal piggy bank, moving money between accounts like a shell game, always staying just within the technical bounds of legality but violating every covenant in those bonds. My attorney, Monica Reyes, had reviewed everything with the precision of a surgeon. "This is bulletproof," she'd said, spreading the documents across her conference table. "They agreed to these terms. They took the money. And now they've violated at least 6 separate covenant provisions." Trevor Pike, the forensic accountant I'd hired with my last savings from Northbridge Pay, had been even more blunt. "Mrs. Hale has been running a classic commingling scheme, legal barely, ethical not even close, violation of the bond covenants, absolutely." The power of attorney document from Garnet Ridge had been signed by my co-trustees, my grandfather's former partners, who trusted his judgment even from beyond the grave. They didn't care about the Hale family drama. They cared about protecting their investment. When I presented them with evidence of covenant violations, they'd signed without hesitation. But the real masterstroke had come last week. Daniel had tried to make peace, suggesting we should move forward and not dwell on family tensions. He'd stood in our bedroom, straightening his tie, a tie his mother had bought him, and said, "Ava, you need to understand your position in this family." "My position?" I'd asked, watching him in the mirror. "Mother provides for us. The family trust pays for this house, our cars, the children's future education. You can't keep antagonizing her." When she called me broke at last month's garden party, "Where were you?" He'd paused, then delivered the words that sealed his fate. "Sometimes we have to accept certain realities. Mother controls the money. That's just how it is." That night, I'd called Monica. "File everything the morning of Thanksgiving. I want the freeze to hit while we're all at dinner. She'd hesitated. That's dramatic. That's the point. Now, as Eleanor held court at her Thanksgiving table, pontificating about the lazy poor and their expectations of handouts, the clock on my phone showed 3 minutes until her world would shatter. The banking system would process the court order, the algorithms would flag the account, and $31 million would become untouchable. I watched her laugh at her own joke about food stamps, watched my husband nod along, watched the entire family perform their synchronized symphony of sycophancy. They had no idea that I'd already pulled the trigger. The weapon was loaded, fired, and the bullet was speeding toward them through fiber optic cables and legal channels. 2 minutes now. Eleanor raised her glass for another toast to family prosperity. To the Hale legacy, she proclaimed. May it never be diluted by those who don't understand its value. I raised my glass with the others, knowing that in exactly 120 seconds, she would understand value in a way she never had before. The investigation had taken 3 months of meticulous work, conducted in the shadows while I played the role of the defeated daughter-in-law. Monica Reyes had become more than my attorney. She was my strategic partner in what she called the cleanest financial takedown I've ever seen. We need to be surgical about this, Monica had explained during our first meeting at her office in Providence. At 40, she had already made a name for herself in white-collar litigation, taking down corrupt executives who thought their money made them untouchable. The Hales aren't just wealthy, they're connected. One wrong move and they'll bury us in countersuits. Trevor Pike had joined us via secure video conference from his Boston office. His forensic accounting firm specialized in unraveling complex financial structures, and what he'd found in the Hale finances was a masterclass in legal but unethical maneuvering. Look at this, Trevor had said, sharing his screen to reveal a web of transactions. Every month, Eleanor authorizes a transfer from the Hale Family Foundation to Hale Family Holdings for administrative services. The holdings company then pays her personal American Express bill. The foundation claims the tax deduction. She gets her shopping sprees funded with pre-tax dollars. Monica had whistled low. That's dancing on the edge. It gets better, Trevor continued. She's been using the foundation's investment account to provide zero-interest loans to her friends' businesses, then having those businesses donate back to the foundation at inflated valuations for tax write-offs. Technically legal if done right, but she's sloppy with documentation. The pattern was extensive. Eleanor had treated the family's various entities, the foundation, the holdings company, 3 separate trusts, and 2 offshore LLCs as interchangeable accounts. Money flowed between them like water finding its level, always ending up wherever Eleanor needed it most. But the smoking gun had come from an unexpected source, Patricia's Instagram account. My sister-in-law loved to document her luxury lifestyle, and she'd accidentally photographed something crucial during Eleanor's summer charity retreat to Martha's Vineyard. In the background of a selfie, barely visible on Eleanor's laptop screen, was an email about transferring $800,000 from the foundation to cover a personal yacht purchase, labeled as Marine Research Vessel for Oceanographic Charity Work. That's fraud, Monica had said simply. And more importantly, it's a clear violation of Section 47B, subsection 3 of the Bond Covenant. The UCC liens were even more interesting. The Hales had pledged the same collateral multiple times across different transactions, creating a maze of conflicting claims that only worked because no one had ever challenged them. Until now, I'd compiled everything into what Monica called the Bible, a 300-page document that detailed every violation, every questionable transfer, every breach of fiduciary duty. Each item was cross-referenced with bank statements, emails obtained through discovery requests on other lawsuits, and public filings that the Hales never thought anyone would connect. The week before Thanksgiving, we'd refined our strategy. The temporary restraining order would request an immediate freeze on the operational account pending a full audit. The legal basis was solid as a bondholder's representative. I had standing to demand compliance with the covenants. The evidence of violations gave us cause. The urgency of preventing further potential fraud gave us the right to emergency relief. "You understand what this means?" Monica had asked during our final preparation meeting. "Once we file, there's no going back. The Hales will come after you with everything they have." "Let them," I'd replied. "They'll have to do it with frozen assets." Daniel had unknowingly given me the final piece of ammunition 2 nights ago. He'd been working late in his home office, or so he claimed, but I'd seen the documents on his desk plans to transfer another $12 million from the foundation to fund a new development project, with Eleanor as the silent partner taking 60% of profits while the foundation bore all the risk. "Isn't that illegal?" I'd asked casually, photographing the pages while pretending to bring him coffee. "Mother's lawyers say it's fine," he'd replied without looking up. "The foundation's board approved it. The board that consists of Eleanor, you, and Patricia. Don't start. Ava, this is how business works." That exchange had gone straight into an affidavit, sworn and notarized. Now, as Thanksgiving dinner continued around me, my phone showed a new message from Monica. "Judge signed TRO 10 minutes ago. Seabright Bank confirmed receipt. Freeze will process at exactly 2:15 p.m. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner, an antique Eleanor loved to mention, cost more than most people's houses. 2:13 p.m. The second hand swept around once. 2:14. Eleanor was midway through a story about firing a housekeeper who dared to ask for Christmas Day off when her phone buzzed. She ignored it, but I saw the Seabright Private Bank notification preview on her screen. The second hand completed another rotation. 2:15 p.m. Eleanor's phone buzzed again. Then Uncle Richard's. Then Patricia's. A cascade of notifications rippled through the room as every family member with access to the accounts received the same alert. The matriarch of the Hale family glanced at her phone, and I watched the color drain from her face like water from a broken dam. The morning of Thanksgiving had begun at 5:45 a.m., when Monica Reyes filed our carefully prepared petition with the Rhode Island Superior Court. Judge Harrison, who had a reputation for despising financial manipulation dressed up as charity work, had reviewed our emergency motion by 7:30 a.m. "Your Honor," Monica had argued via conference call, "the evidence shows a clear pattern of self-dealing that threatens the bondholder's security. Every day that passes without oversight represents potential further diminishment of assets pledged as collateral." The judge had granted our TRO by 8:15 a.m. With one crucial addition, we hadn't even requested he'd expanded the freeze to include any accounts where Eleanor Hale was a signatory, not just the main operational account. Monica had texted me immediately. "Christmas came early. Judge is pissed about the charity angle." By 9 a.m., Seabright Private Bank's legal department had received the court order. Their compliance team had no choice but to implement it immediately. Federal banking regulations gave them no wiggle room when faced with a valid court order. The freeze would go into effect at 2:15 p.m., precisely timed for maximum impact. I'd arrived at the Hale estate at noon, playing my part perfectly. I wore the same black dress from last year that Eleanor had mocked, carried the same understated purse, even drove the same Honda Accord that Patricia called desperately middle class. Every detail reinforced their perception of me as the family's charity case. "Ava, you're here," Daniel had said with visible relief when I walked in. "I was worried you might skip after last month's unpleasantness." "I wouldn't miss Thanksgiving with family," I'd replied, kissing his cheek while noting how he flinched slightly at the word family. The dining room had been set with the Hale family china, each place setting worth more than most monthly salaries. Eleanor had made sure to seat me between Cousin William, who spent the entire meal discussing his investment portfolio, and Aunt Beatrice, who was deep in her third glass of wine before the turkey arrived. Throughout the meal, I'd maintained perfect composure, laughing at the right moments, deflecting barbs with practiced grace. When Uncle Richard made another joke about unemployment benefits, I'd simply smiled and said, "I'm learning so much about how different systems work." Eleanor had taken that as an admission of defeat. Systems, She'd laughed. The only system you need to understand, dear, is that those who have keep, and those who don't, well, she gestured vaguely at my dress. At 2:14 p.m., I'd sent a single text to Monica, confirm. She'd replied instantly, executing now. The bank's systems worked with algorithmic precision. At exactly 2:15 p.m., every account with Eleanor's signature authority was flagged, frozen, and locked pending judicial review. The operational account with $31 million, the foundation's investment accounts, her personal checking and savings. Even the credit cards linked to those accounts were instantly deactivated. The notifications hit simultaneously. Eleanor's phone lit up with alerts from Seabright Private Bank, each one more urgent than the last. Around the table, other family members began checking their phones as their banking apps showed error messages when they tried to access the family accounts. "What the hell?" Richard muttered, staring at his screen. Patricia tried to refresh her app. The system must be down, but Eleanor knew better. I could see it in her eyes as she read the message on her screen. Court-ordered freeze pursuant to TRO, ZAR 2024, CV 4847. All transactions suspended pending compliance review. Contact legal department immediately. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "I need to make a call." She stood to leave, but I knew she needed to perform for her audience. The matriarch couldn't show weakness, couldn't admit that something was wrong. Not yet. "Is everything all right, Mother?" Daniel asked. "Just some banking nonsense," she replied, but her hand trembled slightly as she set down her napkin. "These computer systems, you know how they are around holidays." She stepped into the hallway, and we could all hear her sharp voice. "What do you mean, frozen? This is Eleanor Hale. Get me David Whitman immediately." A pause. "What do you mean he's not available?" "It's Thanksgiving. I don't care if it's the second coming." The table sat in uncomfortable silence. William tried to restart conversation about his portfolio, but even he could feel the shift in atmospheric pressure. Something was happening. Something big. And they all knew Eleanor's phone calls didn't sound like routine banking errors. She returned 5 minutes later, her face composed but her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. "Small technical issue," she announced. "Shall we move on to dessert?" That's when she made her crucial mistake. Eleanor, trying to reassert control, decided to make a grand gesture. "Actually, before dessert, I wanted to share some exciting news. The foundation is pledging $500,000 to the Providence Art Museum's new wing. William, would you be a dear and bring in that bottle of Chateau d'Yquem from the cellar, the 1987? We should toast properly." William returned with the bottle, a sweet wine worth $12,000. Eleanor handed her credit card to Patricia. "Order another case from the merchant. Darling, we'll need it for the museum gala." Patricia pulled out her phone to make the purchase, typing in the card information. We all watched as she frowned, typed again, then looked up in confusion. "It's declining." "That's impossible," Eleanor said, her voice sharp enough to cut crystal. "Try again." Patricia dutifully entered the information again, her manicured nails clicking against her phone screen. "It's still declining. It says to contact the issuing bank." "Use the foundation card," Eleanor commanded, pulling the Black American Express from her wallet. "Here." The room watched in tense silence as Patricia typed in the new information. Her face told us everything before she even spoke. "This one's declined, too." "Must be the merchant's system," Uncle Richard offered weakly. "Holiday overloads." Eleanor's phone rang David Whitman from Seabright Private Bank, finally returning her call. She answered with forced calm. "David, there seems to be some confusion with our accounts." Her face went from pale to ashen as she listened. "What do you mean a court order? That's absurd. Who would—" She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto mine. In that moment, I saw the first crack in her decades-old armor. She covered the phone's microphone and hissed, "Everyone except family. Out. Now." The catering staff scattered like startled birds. Even Cousin Margaret's husband, technically family by marriage but never truly accepted, excused himself to the garden. That left 15 Hales and me. Eleanor ended her call and stood at the head of the table, gripping the back of her chair. "Someone," she said slowly, "has convinced a judge to freeze our accounts. Someone with access to bond covenants and the authority to enforce them." "That's impossible," Daniel said. "Only the bondholders could—" He stopped, turning to look at me. "Ava." I took a sip of wine, letting the silence stretch. "Yes, Daniel. What did you do?" "I exercised my fiduciary duty as the authorized representative of Garnet Ridge Holdings, one of your family's largest bondholders. When I discovered multiple covenant violations, I had no choice but to seek judicial intervention." Eleanor's laugh was bitter as hemlock. "Your grandfather's worthless little fund. You think that gives you power over us?" "Not power over you," I corrected. "Power to enforce the contracts you signed, contracts you never read. Eleanor, documents you had Daniel sign without review, agreements you thought were just formalities to get the money you needed." "This is extortion," Patricia shrieked. "No," I replied calmly, pulling my phone from my purse. "This is contract law. Extortion would be threatening to expose how you've been using the foundation as your personal tax shelter unless you pay me. I'm simply requiring compliance with existing agreements." I opened my bag and withdrew a folder, thick with documents. "Would you like me to read some highlights the yacht purchased as a research vessel? The art bought for your bedroom but deducted as museum donations. The $70,000 shopping spree in Paris claimed as cultural exchange activities?" "You little bitch," Eleanor snarled, abandoning all pretense of civility. "You think you can walk into my house, eat at my table, and destroy what we've built?" "I didn't destroy anything," I said, standing to face her. "You did. Every time you treated charitable funds as your personal allowance. Every time you moved money between accounts to hide personal expenses. Every time you assumed being rich meant being untouchable." Daniel grabbed my arm. "Ava, stop this. Whatever you think you're accomplishing." I shook him off. "What I'm accomplishing. Your mother just tried to pledge $500,000 she stole from a charity to buy social status at a museum. She named a wing after herself with money meant for actual charitable work." "The foundation's board approved everything," Richard protested. "A board consisting entirely of family members who directly benefit from the transactions." I laughed. "That's not oversight. Richard, that's conspiracy." Eleanor's phone buzzed again. Then another call. And another. The family lawyers, the accountants, the wealth managers, everyone discovering simultaneously that the Hale empire had been frozen solid. "How much?" Eleanor asked quietly, her voice dangerous. $31 million in the operational account alone," I replied. "Another $18 million across the foundation accounts. Your personal accounts add another $6 million. So roughly $55 million. All frozen pending a comprehensive audit of covenant compliance." "The museum gala is tomorrow night," Patricia whispered. "The donations we pledged, the table sponsorships. All impossible now," I confirmed. "Unless, of course, you can pay cash." Eleanor moved toward me, her face contorted with rage, but William caught her arm. "Mother, don't. It'll make things worse." "Worse," she laughed harshly. "This parasite has destroyed us. The payments due on the Greenwich property, the yacht maintenance, the staff salaries. Everything runs through those accounts. Then I suggest," I said, placing the legal documents on the table, "you review my terms for unfreezing them. It's all here, filed with the court this morning. Full forensic audit by an independent firm. Restitution of any misappropriated charitable funds. Restructuring of the foundation board to include actual independent directors." I paused, meeting Eleanor's eyes. "And a written, public apology to me for your treatment, acknowledging that I am not, in fact, broke." The room erupted, Patricia screaming about humiliation, Richard threatening legal action, William calculating the financial impact. But I only watched Eleanor, saw her realize that her carefully constructed world of control had shattered like the crystal she so proudly displayed. Daniel stood frozen between us, finally forced to choose a side in a war he'd pretended didn't exist. I placed the stack of documents on the mahogany table with deliberate precision, the sound echoing through the silent dining room. "Let me explain exactly what you're looking at," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. "This," I held up the first document, "is the temporary restraining order signed by Judge Harrison at 8:15 this morning. It freezes all accounts where Eleanor Hale has signatory authority. Effective immediately." Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached for it, her reading glasses shaking as she put them on. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. "This," I continued, lifting the second set of papers, "is the covenant agreement from your 2020 bond issuance. Section 47B, which you're currently in violation of. Multiple times over." "You can't prove anything," Richard blustered. "Actually, I opened the third folder, spreading out bank statements, emails, and transaction records like tarot cards revealing a doomed future. June 15th, 800,000 transferred from the foundation to Hale Holdings for a yacht, documented as marine research equipment. June 20th, the same yacht registered in Eleanor's personal name for recreational use. I pulled out another sheet. September 3rd, 2.3 million moved from the foundation to cover the shortfall on the Greenwich property, a property owned personally by Eleanor and Daniel, not the foundation. September 12th. The foundation claims a charitable deduction for housing development. The house in question, Eleanor's vacation home. "Those were loans," Eleanor said weakly. "All perfectly legal. Loans require documentation, board approval from independent directors, and reasonable interest rates," I countered. "You have none of those. What you have is self-dealing, and every transaction is a separate violation triggering default provisions." I turned to the next document, but here's the truly damaging part: the cross-default clause in your credit facility with Seabright. If you default on the bonds, you default on everything. Every loan, every line of credit, every financial instrument the Hale family has touched becomes immediately callable. Patricia's phone rang her husband calling from their Beacon Hill townhouse. She answered, her face draining of color. "The house credit line is frozen too, but that's not even in Mother's name." She looked at me with dawning horror. "You froze everything." "The cross-default provisions froze everything," I corrected. "I just pulled the first domino." Eleanor sank into her chair, the queen finally realizing her kingdom was built on sand. "What do you want?" "It's all here," I said, sliding the settlement proposal across the table. "Full independent audit by Thornfield Associates. They specialize in charity fraud. By the way, complete restitution of misappropriated funds with interest, restructuring of all family entities with actual oversight, and yes, that public apology." "Never," Eleanor spat. "Then the freeze remains," I said simply. "Monday morning, your lawyers will file motions. The court will set a hearing for mid-December, maybe January if the docket's full. Meanwhile, no access to any funds. No payments on your properties, they'll start foreclosure proceedings within 90 days. No yacht maintenance, it'll be impounded at the marina for unpaid dock fees. No staff salaries, they'll quit within 2 weeks. I pulled out my phone, showing them an email. "Monica Reyes, my attorney, is standing by. One call from me and she files the settlement with the court. The freeze lifts within 24 hours. You'll have access to funds again, minus what's held for restitution." "How much restitution?" William asked. Ever the pragmatist. "Based on our preliminary analysis, 12 million give or take." The room exploded again, but Eleanor raised her hand for silence. She looked older suddenly, the careful Botox unable to hide the defeat in her eyes. "And if I refuse, then we go to trial. In public, every transaction scrutinized, every receipt questioned, The Providence Journal would love this story. Prominent family accused of charity fraud. The museum gala tomorrow will be interesting when you can't pay for your table and everyone knows why. Daniel finally spoke, his voice hollow. Ava, she's my mother. And I'm your wife, I shot back. Why, when she humiliated me, called me broke, said I was a gold digger who married above my station, where were you? When she made me sit through dinner after dinner of insults while you stayed silent, where was your loyalty? Then, I turned back to Eleanor. You have 1 hour to decide. Sign the agreement, or I file additional motions Monday morning. Criminal referrals to the Attorney General's office are already drafted. Charity fraud is a felony in Rhode Island, in case you weren't aware. Eleanor's phone rang again. David Whitman from Seabright, according to the screen. She didn't answer. The Beacon Hill property has a payment due Tuesday, Patricia whispered to her mother. $300,000. The yacht insurance is due Monday. William added quietly. The museum gala deposits. Someone else murmured. Eleanor looked at the papers, then at me, then at her family falling apart around her. The great Eleanor Hale, who'd ruled through financial control for decades, finally understanding what it meant to be powerless. You planned this, she said, a strange note of something almost like respect in her voice. Every detail. I learned from the best, I replied. My grandfather always said the rich make 2 mistakes: they don't read the fine print, and they assume the poor are stupid. You made both. The grandfather clock chimed 3 o'clock. Outside, November wind rattled the windows like creditors at the door. These are my terms, I said, standing at the head of the table where Eleanor usually presided. Non-negotiable. You have 45 minutes left to decide. I pulled out the formal settlement agreement Monica had prepared, each page watermarked with the law firm's seal. First, Eleanor Hale immediately resigns as primary signatory on all Hale family holdings and foundation accounts. You retain ownership but lose unilateral control. Every transaction over $10,000 requires 2 signatures, yours and an independent trustee appointed by the court. That's insulting, Eleanor hissed. That's accountability, I corrected. Second full forensic audit by Thornfield Associates, paid for by the family, not the foundation. They'll review 5 years of transactions. Any funds improperly diverted from charitable purposes get returned with interest at market rates. Third, I continued, not giving them time to interrupt. The foundation board expands to 7 members. The Hale family keeps 3 seats. 4 independent directors with actual nonprofit experience take the rest. No more rubber stamp votes on your shopping sprees. Patricia started to object, but I cut her off. Fourth, a written apology from Eleanor to me, on Hale family letterhead, acknowledging that she defamed my character and that I am not, as she so eloquently put it, broke or a gold digger. This letter will be sent to everyone who attended the last 3 family events where she made such statements. I'd rather die, Eleanor said flatly. Then prepare for bankruptcy, I replied, because without access to these accounts, you can't make the payment on the Greenwich property Tuesday. That triggers default. The bank seizes the property, auctions it for below market value, and comes after your other assets for the difference. Domino effect takes down everything within 6 months. I turned to Daniel, my voice softer but no less firm. And you have a choice to make. Stand with the truth, or stand with the lie your family's been living. Daniel looked between his mother and me, his face twisted with indecision. Ava, if you do this, there's no coming back. The family will never. The family never accepted me anyway, I interrupted. At least now they'll respect me, or fear me. Either works. So, Eleanor's lawyer, Harrison Blackwood, burst through the dining room doors, his face flushed from rushing over on Thanksgiving afternoon. Eleanor, don't sign anything. We can fight this. Harry, Eleanor said wearily, can you unfreeze the accounts today? He hesitated. Well, no. We'd need to file motions. Get a hearing scheduled. How long? Realistically 3 to 4 weeks minimum. longer if they oppose, which they will. And in the meantime, Harrison's silence was answer enough. I checked my phone. 38 minutes remaining. Though I should mention Monica just texted that the Wall Street Journal is very interested in this story. Something about nonprofit governance and family dynasties. I told her to wait until 4 p.m. before responding. You wouldn't dare, Richard said. I took on the entire Hale family over Thanksgiving dinner, I reminded him. What exactly wouldn't I dare? Eleanor stood slowly, walking to the window overlooking the manicured grounds that required a staff of 12 to maintain, staff that expected paychecks Monday. If I sign, she said quietly, what guarantee do I have that this ends here? My word, I said, which, unlike yours, actually means something. The audit happens, restitution gets paid, governance gets fixed. After that, I'm done. I don't want your money or your family drama. I just want respect. And our marriage? Daniel asked. I looked at my husband, really looked at him for the first time in months. Weak chin, weaker spine, designer clothes picked by his mother, opinions shaped by his trust fund. That depends entirely on you, Daniel. Whether you want a wife or whether you want to remain Eleanor's little boy. The room fell silent except for the ticking clock. 25 minutes left. William cleared his throat. Mother, the practical implications. I know the implications, Eleanor snapped. Then, more quietly, I know. She returned to the table, picking up the settlement agreement with shaking hands. If I sign this, you'll call off the freeze immediately. Monica files within 10 minutes. The bank will have the modification order by 5 p.m. Limited access restored by tomorrow morning, enough for critical payments, but under the new restrictions. And the criminal referrals. Never get filed, assuming the audit doesn't find actual crimes versus just covenant violations. Eleanor laughed bitterly. You know, in 40 years of business, no one has ever cornered me like this. Not competitors, not regulators, not even my late husband. And you did it with paper. Your paper, I reminded her. Your contracts, your violations. I just read what you signed. She picked up the Mont Blanc pen. Another thing she loved to mention cost more than most people's rent. Daniel, come here. My husband walked over slowly, like a man approaching the gallows. You're going to have to choose, she told him. I'll sign this because I have no choice. But afterward, you need to decide whether you're a Hale or whether you're her husband. You can't be both anymore. That's not fair, he protested. Fair? Eleanor laughed. Your wife just destroyed 40 years of careful financial structuring in one afternoon. Fair is off the table. She turned to the signature page, her hand hovering over the line. The room held its breath. One condition, she said, looking at me. The apology letter acknowledges the facts but doesn't admit legal wrongdoing. I considered, then nodded. Acceptable. Monica can add that language. Eleanor signed with sharp, angry strokes. Then the second copy. Then the third. Someone call David Whitman, she commanded. Tell him to expect court documents within the hour. I picked up my phone and typed a single word to Monica, done. The response was immediate. Filing now. Eleanor's signature was barely dry when the phones started ringing. David Whitman from Seabright Private Bank confirming receipt of the modified court order. Monica Reyes verifying the settlement was filed. The Thornfield Associates audit team scheduling their initial review for Monday morning. The entire Hale family sat frozen around their Thanksgiving table, watching their matriarch's hand shake as she set down the pen. The Mont Blanc rolled across the mahogany, coming to rest against the sterling silver gravy boat nobody had touched. It's done, Eleanor said quietly. Her voice aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Get out of my house. I gathered the signed documents carefully, placing them in my briefcase with the same precision I'd used to plan this moment. Actually, Eleanor, this is technically Daniel's house too. Community property laws in Rhode Island are quite clear. Her eyes flashed with the last ember of fight. You poisonous little broke, I interrupted. The word you're looking for is broke, except I'm not. Am I? And now everyone knows it. My phone buzzed with confirmation from Monica. Bank acknowledged receipt. Limited access restored effective 6 a.m. tomorrow. Audit team locked in. Congratulations. I stood, smoothing my dress the same one Eleanor had mocked just hours ago. Around the table, the Hale family looked like survivors of a bombing, stunned and dusty with the debris of their collapsed empire. Patricia was crying silently into her napkin. Richard stared at his phone, watching account after account show access restricted status. William had already started calculating what assets might need liquidation to cover the restitution. And Daniel, my husband, sat with his head in his hands, finally understanding the cost of his silence. Daniel, I said, my voice carrying across the battlefield of sterling silver and shattered pride. You have 24 hours to decide. Come home with me now, or stay here with them. But if you stay, don't come back. He looked up at me, then at his mother, torn between two worlds that could no longer coexist. She's your wife, Cousin Margaret said suddenly, the first time she'd ever defended me in 5 years. For God's sake, Daniel, she's your wife. Eleanor's laugh was bitter as burnt coffee. Wife. She's a corporate raider who used marriage as a Trojan horse. No, I corrected, snapping my briefcase shut. I'm a woman who married for love and got treated like staff. The only difference between me and your housekeepers is that I had the tools to fight back. I pulled out one final document from my purse, not a legal paper, but a photograph. My grandfather and me at my law school graduation, his proud smile captured forever. I placed it on the table in front of Eleanor. His name was Samuel Finch. He spent 40 years cleaning up the messes of wealthy families who thought contracts were suggestions and laws were for poor people. He taught me that power isn't about money, it's about knowledge. And the most powerful knowledge is understanding what powerful people never bother to read. I picked up the photograph and walked toward the door, my heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of a countdown clock. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. The apology letter needs to be sent within 72 hours. Monica has the list of recipients, 63 people who heard you call me broke, gold digger, or charity case. Each one will receive a personal copy on Hale family letterhead. Eleanor's face was stone, but her signature on the settlement was ink and ironclad. Oh, and Eleanor, I added, my hand on the door handle. Your credit cards will work again tomorrow morning, but remember every transaction over $10,000 needs that second signature now. Maybe ask the independent trustee if that $15,000 handbag really counts as a business expense. I walked out of the Hale mansion into the November afternoon, leaving behind the wreckage of a dynasty that had mistaken wealth for wisdom and privilege for power. Behind me, I heard Daniel's voice, weak but clear. Ava, wait. I stopped on the circular driveway, next to my Honda Accord that Patricia had mocked so many times. Daniel emerged from the house, his face pale but resolved. I'm sorry, he said, for everything, for not defending you, for letting them all treat you that way. Sorry doesn't change the past 5 years, Daniel. No, he agreed, but maybe it can change the next 5. He walked past his mother's Bentley, past his father's vintage Rolls-Royce, past all the symbols of Hale wealth and power, and opened the passenger door of my Honda. Take me home, he said. Please. As we drove away from Mariner's Point, my phone displayed one final message from Eleanor, sent through her lawyer. The letter will be sent as agreed. You've won. I hadn't won. I'd simply refused to lose. There's a difference. One my grandfather would have understood perfectly. The accounts would unfreeze tomorrow. The audit would begin Monday. The Hale family would survive. Though diminished and definitely restructured, Eleanor would send her apology letter, each word burning her throat like acid. And somewhere in heaven, Samuel Finch was smiling at his granddaughter who'd read the fine print and found justice in 12-point font. At exactly 4:15 p.m., as we crossed the Jamestown Bridge, the sun broke through the November clouds. In my rearview mirror, the Hale mansion grew smaller and smaller until it was just another house by the sea, owned by people who'd learned that being broke has nothing to do with money and everything to do with moral bankruptcy. The settlement funds would clear in 30 days, $12 million would return to legitimate charitable work, and Eleanor Hale would never again mistake a quiet woman for a weak one. My phone rang. Monica Reyes. The Wall Street Journal killed the story when I told them we'd settled, but the Providence Business Review wants an exclusive on corporate governance reform. Interested. Not today, I said, reaching over to take Daniel's hand. Today. I just want to go home. And for the first time in 5 years, home felt like a place I'd earned, not endured. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of justice served cold at a Thanksgiving table, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. What would you have done in Ava's position? Let me know in the comments.